Hi, and welcome to number 8 in this video series that I'm calling Beginnings. And in this series we are looking at the opening chapters of the Bible book of Genesis. I think they are remarkable chapters which shed just an incredible amount of understanding on the world, on our lives, and how we ought to be living. So this particular video, most of my videos can kind of stand alone, but this one really requires having seen number 7, in which I look at most of Genesis 3. Genesis 1 and 2, the first 2 chapters of the Bible, are tremendously hopeful and encouraging. They reveal all kinds of God's blessings for people everywhere, and that we are called to enjoy God's world and to spread out in it and to thrive as a human community and to have a wonderful relationship not only with each other but also with God and with all of creation. All of that falls off the rails in Genesis 3. And so I'm calling this double video Tenille Townsend, Cornwallis, Evil, Genesis 3, and a missing element in the discussions about God and evil. Kind of a long title, but I think it captures what we need to be doing with these 2 videos. So again, if you've seen video number 7, the previous one, then you will know kind of where we are. And we've just seen in video 3 where Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a kind of knowledge which is appropriate to God. They think things are going to turn out just great, and disaster comes, and God visits them, and what happens, what he says there is very difficult. So we covered that in the previous video. Now there's an epilogue to all this, and it's at the end of the chapter, and that's where we're at right now. But before we get to that epilogue, I want to notice 3 things, 3 things which are connected with the previous video. First of all, curses. Of all the living beings in the story, except for God, of all the other 3 living beings in the story, only of the serpent does God say, "You are cursed." Adam and Eve will find life incredibly difficult, but God does not curse them directly as he cursed the serpent. More about the serpent in a moment. So, nevertheless, even though Adam and Eve are not directly cursed, they will experience pain. And even in our modern world, pain is always near the door, never that far away. Death comes for everyone. During a COVID-19 pandemic, we realize that our health around the planet can be impacted very quickly and very negatively. There's a fragility there, and there are other personal pains and natural disasters that we are all exposed to from time to time. And so pain and suffering are never that far away, and we hold them at bay only by our very hard efforts. And even then, freedom from pain and the achievement of pleasure are created unequally. So we're working very hard dealing with what I call the residual effects of the pain that was imposed on Adam and Eve following their disobedience to God. Now, so there's that about the curses and then also what Adam and Eve experienced, which was not really direct cursing, but nevertheless that key aspects of their lives would become ridden with pain, having children and bringing food from the earth. So that's about the curses. The second thing is about God. Now, I don't know if this is totally accurate because I haven't discovered it in any of my readings, or if I did, it's been so long ago I've forgotten. But I think that in chapter 3 we find God relenting from his threatened punishment. He had told Adam and Eve earlier on that the moment you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. However, that does not happen. So the future of humans becomes tougher because of the pain now that's involved in living. But our lives, the life of Adam and Eve, the life of the human race, is not extinguished as God had originally said. So I think that the theme of the God who relents, from his righteous standards, the God who relents, shows up a number of times in the Bible, and it's kind of a very cool thing to think about. God is holy, has very impressive standards, but even when Adam and Eve, and kind of by implication ourselves, we fail, he relents and even offers more than just relenting, and we'll get to that right now. So the third thing that I want to notice are the curses, the God who relents, and the third thing, there is a future. Children will be born, seeds will be planted, and crops will be harvested. In spite of everything, in spite of Adam and Eve's disobedience, which resulted in a breakdown of so many things, in spite of it, there will be life. There will be life in spite of everything. So I think now we're ready for what I call the epilogue. I'm probably not the first one to call it that, but I'm going to read it for a moment. It's the end of chapter 3, and it reads this way. The man known as Adam named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. God made leather clothing for Adam and Eve and dressed them. And God said, "The man has become like one of us, capable of knowing everything, ranging from good to evil. What if he should now reach out and take fruit from the tree of life and eat and live forever? Never. This cannot happen." So God expelled them from the Garden of Eden and sent them to work the ground, the same dirt out of which they'd been made. He threw them out of the garden and stationed an angel with a revolving sword of fire east of it, guarding the path to the tree of life. And if you remember the description of the Garden of Eden, it contains two important trees: the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was not meant for people, but also the tree of life, which is symbolic of access to life without death. And so in this epilogue, a number of things happen, but one of them is that God he prevents Adam and Eve from returning to the tree of life and living forever in their current state. So a few things about this epilogue, three things. One is Adam renames woman. He now calls her Eve, and I think this is meant to be kind of a magisterial, royal title. So sometimes in our modern world we use the word matriarchy to describe certain themes or certain aspects, and there's a sense in which the first woman is kind of a matriarch. She's the mother of all living persons. Secondly, in this epilogue, God dresses Adam and Eve. In my previous video I mentioned how Adam and Eve had made kind of makeshift clothes out of fig leaves, which must have looked pretty bad, wilting, and trying to make clothing out of fig leaves. I don't live in an area where you see fig trees, where you see other kinds of trees, but you can easily imagine that the clothing would not be all that flattering or durable. and they look a bit silly. So God dresses Adam and Eve. So this is kind of a personal display of God's affection for his fallen children. He provides protection from the hard world outside the garden by dressing them for the elements, so to speak. That's the second thing about the epilogue. The third thing about the epilogue is that God ensures that the hard lives of Adam and Eve will not be forever. And I think by extension, kind of a residual understanding for our own selves is that the hard lives we lead are not our final destiny. We do have to leave behind these injured, sin-committing bodies. That is part of the meaning of death. It's the end of hardship and sin. And so the path back to the tree of life is cut off, but only temporarily. The tree of life appears again at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation. And there is a path back to the tree of life. It was cut off from Adam and Eve in this opening chapters of Genesis. They were prevented from going back to it. But we will again have access to life without death. So in the meantime though, Adam and Eve, even though they would gladly crawl across broken glass on their hands and knees to get back to the tree of life, to avoid death, that is not to be. So they will die, and a residual effect is that so will we. So that's the epilogue. There's kind of a number of very hopeful strands there. Now I want to go back to one thing in this story before I kind of summarize what I think are the key understandings about evil that we can run with. And I want to go back to the serpent. Somewhere around the middle of the chapter, God declares war between the serpent and the woman. And what could this mean? And this pertains a little bit to the discussion of whether we should see these as literal stories or as something a little different. As I mentioned in an earlier video, the serpent accuses God of being untrustworthy in his discussion with Eve. And later on in the Bible, we see evil personified in Satan. And Satan means accuser. Right? So as the Bible progresses, the source of evil and emerges a little more clearly in the accuser, who accuses God of things and persuades us to go along. So then God says to the serpent, your legs are gone, you'll crawl on the ground, and so forth. But then he says that an offspring of the woman will strike the head of the serpent, although the serpent will strike the heel of that offspring. In other words, a child of Eve can expect a wound from the serpent, from which that child will be able to recover. It's not likely fatal, but a strike to the head is likely to kill. And so some Bible translations render these words as, you, serpent, will wound or will strike the heel of one of Eve's offspring, but that offspring will crush your head. And I think they use the word crush to denote that the wound that the child gives to the serpent will be fatal. And so in this very crucial page of the Bible, we see a foreshadowing of the end of the rule of sin and evil. A victory over evil, the very source of evil, will emerge. It's not there yet, but it's going to come, and this victory will involve a child of Eve. A human will defeat the accuser. So when you see it in that way, and you see the way in which there are things that emerge here which are not literal, but which are very substantial and very true, maybe this kind of gives us a little bit of a clue as to that other broader question, whether the different parts of these opening chapters of Genesis should be taken literally or not. Maybe they teach things which are literally true, but they don't necessarily mean that all the things mentioned in the stories are literally true. Okay, we need to wrap up. So how should we understand evil? So this is how I'm going to wrap up the chapter very quickly. Number one, in terms of the sources of evil, there is a powerful source of evil outside of ourselves. There's a powerful source of evil outside ourselves, which is represented in this story by the clever talking serpent, who is one of God's creatures. One of God's creatures. So evil does not exist as somehow apart from God or equal to God. It's kind of a parasite that has sprung up within God's creation. Ultimately, it also depends on God's having created the things which went bad. That's maybe a little part of a larger discussion, but the source, the ultimate source of evil is in a realm, a powerful realm outside of ourselves. And I think this is often the missing element in discussions about the problem of evil. Why does God permit so much evil? And what's often not brought out of those discussions is that the source of evil, is not God. God is all good, but the source of evil is a powerful one, and it is rooted in some aspects or some elements or some personalities, angelic or otherwise, part of God's creation, going bad against God. So if evil is so powerful, maybe that helps us see why sometimes unbelievable tragedies and evils do arise in the world. Okay, so the source of evil outside ourselves. Nevertheless, the thriving of evil also depends on the first people, and we kind of ratify that all the time, every time we do something which knowingly or unknowingly is wrong and sinful. So source of evil outside of ourselves, but also we ratify those sources all the time. And also evil involves the natural world. So maybe this is where there's somehow an opportunity to discuss earthquakes and other natural disasters, but the talking serpent is part of God's natural world and becomes an instrument of evil and suffering in the story of the Bible. So I think those are very important insights to have. They make the discussion about evil, I think, a little richer and give proper credit to the power of evil. Even though evil is by no means as powerful as God, He has already promised that it will be defeated. So, and also connected with evil, there is suffering. Some of it is brought on by God to wake us up to the importance of Adam and Eve, you disobeyed me in the past, but don't do it again. Look what happened. So there is sometimes suffering that God brings on to wake us up to the importance of staying with Him. So, and even where He does send those kinds of things, these can be taken as a signal of His relenting from His rigorous expectations and leaving the door open for life to continue and even to flourish. And then very lastly, God remember, evil is not equal to God. God and his blessings are stronger, and God, even in this story, has promised that he will defeat evil. And maybe the rest of the Bible story is, wow, how is that going to happen? So I want to follow that Bible story along with you, and we'll do that in the forthcoming videos. Thanks again so much for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and all those cool things. Sort of a double dose this week, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.